Hello, and welcome to the 2021 version of Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. My name's Evan Green. I'm a volunteer at the museum and have been hanging around here for 4 or 5 years. And in the last 3 years, I've been working with the staff to update the information on the firearms in the permanent collection as we go through the inventory. There's about 300 firearms in the permanent collection, and probably 2/3 of the way through. I don't know what I'll do with my time if I ever finish this project. Anyway, what we have today are a couple of very plain, common firearms. So why did I want to feature these on a Firearms Friday? And I think I can explain that. Lots of the other firearms that we've featured are innovative. They represent a change in technology. They can be tied to an event or a historic happening that makes them special. And these are definitely not special, but I think they're really important because they aren't associated with a bandit or an outlaw or a historical event. They are very common firearms, but I'm thinking that lots of people, collectors, firearms aficionados, hunters, sportsmen, started their interest in firearms with guns very similar to these. I certainly did. My first firearm was a 22 bolt action rifle that I got for Christmas when I was 8 years old. I could not take it out without supervision until I had passed muster on my safety procedures. But you can't imagine a more tickled kid at 8 years old when I opened that box and there was a Winchester 22 rifle there, a boy's rifle. So I thought, well, the average person, what would a farmer have had in his firearms closet in the 20s, the 30s, the 50s, the 60s, into the 21st century? Might have been these very simple and plain firearms that were incredibly useful. They were not expensive. As with, if you followed the Firearms Friday videos, you may remember one on the Northwest Trade Gun, which was basically a muzzle-loading shotgun. And it was in use for 3 centuries because it was so versatile. And that is still the case with this modern single-shot shotgun. You can load it with number 8 shot for small game, or number 6 shot for rabbits, number 4 shot for ducks. You can load it with buckshot, and you could take down a deer, probably, with buckshot at close range. Or you could load it with a slug, which would also be acceptable armament for medium-sized game. And you could probably buy one of these. I've got some old Sears and Roebuck catalogs, and you could buy single-barrel shotguns back around the turn of the century for $5 or $6. They were more expensive as time went on, of course, but very inexpensive to acquire and very versatile. Lots of uses. This one's kind of interesting because it has, you can see here, it's got a bulge in the barrel. And this is also kind of a classic problem for people who aren't paying attention to their firearms. And I think it's kind of interesting that this bulge is in the middle of the barrel because the way much of this damage occurred that bulged a barrel was the classic of you mix up your shotgun shells and you drop a 20 gauge shotgun shell in the chamber of a 12 gauge shotgun. That shell will travel far enough down the barrel that you can load a 12 gauge behind it, but when you pull the trigger, it will blow up the gun. The other classic way to damage a gun with a bore obstruction is you're stomping through the swamps and the marsh and you fall down and jam the muzzle into the mud. That would result in damage at the muzzle end of the barrel. And you see some shotguns that have been cut back from the muzzle, probably for that reason. So why is this why is this right in the middle? And my speculation is that it may have been a squib load that was possibly underpowered because in the days of paper shotgun shells, it had gotten wet and moisture degraded the powder, but there was still enough fire in the hole to fire the cartridge, but not enough to totally clear the barrel. So a wadge that separated the shot column from the powder could have lodged at this point, and the next shell that was fired would have bulged that barrel. And the person that did that was very fortunate because it could have easily ruptured that barrel, and it's not something you want to have happen within 18 inches of your face. So again, whoever pulled the trigger was lucky that it didn't burst that barrel. This is a, what's the brand name on this? It is a Continental Arms Company. And this is what is known as a trade shotgun, in that this one was manufactured by the Stevens Arms Company, which had their own line of firearms, including single-barreled shotguns. And the way you can tell that this is a Stevens is this unique semicircle, this crescent where the stock joins the frame. That is indicative that this was made by the Stevens Company. And probably Continental Arms, this may have been a trade name for a hardware store, a mail order outfit, who knows? I couldn't find anything about the origin of the Continental Arms stamp. And this is a 12 gauge, and it says for 2 3/4 inch shells. If you listen to our video on the old Belgian shotguns, you know that it was a big mistake to try and use modern ammunition of 2 3/4 inch length in one of those old shotguns. This would be perfectly fine with modern ammunition. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to talk about this rifle. Again, very representative of the kind of firearms that were very common. Again, not expensive to acquire, and ammunition was cheap. Times have certainly changed. I was in junior high school in 1956, and the science teacher, who was a hunter outdoorsman, had in a locked cabinet in the classroom 5 .22 caliber rifles. And with a note from your parents, you could take one of those rifles home for the weekend to check it out. And I just don't think they do that these days. But if you did, the science teacher, who I think had a deal with the National Rifle Association for acquiring the ammunition, would sell you a box of 50 rounds of .22 ammunition, standard velocity long rifle ammunition, for 50 cents. And some days you can't even find .22 ammunition these days. But again, my dad had a .22 rifle. His was a pump Remington, and he dispatched rabbits and ground squirrels and brought it into play. If we had to butcher a hog or a beef steer for the freezer, that .22 rifle would do the job. This one is again a trade gun in that it is marked J.C. Higgins, which was a trade name for Sears and Roebuck. And this is mechanically identical to the same model of Marlin .22 bolt-action rifle. So this was made by Marlin and trademarked for Sears and Roebuck as a J.C. Higgins. This is an old Weaver scope that's on here, kind of cool. I think it's just eyeballing, it looks like a 2.5 power Weaver scope that's on there. So that would have added a little bit to the cost, but maybe more range and versatility as you use this to shoot some squirrels for supper, or cottontail rabbits, or dispatch crows or magpies or chicken hawks after mom's chickens. So, and again, I wanted to kind of feature these firearms because as I ran across them in the permanent collection, they kind of made me nostalgic for simpler days and easier ways, maybe. So anyway, I think they're cool guns. I thank you for watching our videos. If you have comments or questions, you can probably attach those beneath the video. or you can contact us through the Wyoming State Museum. Thanks for watching.